California sells a dream. Sunshine, opportunity, the promise of reinvention. For generations, it has called out to the desperate and the hopeful alike, asking them to leave everything behind and come west. And they came. Wagon trains crossing impossible mountains, young women stepping off buses onto Hollywood Boulevard, couples parking at lonely lakesides on summer evenings, hikers moving alone through ancient coastal ranges at dusk. Most arrived. Many found what they were searching for. But California keeps secrets. Beneath the golden hills, beneath the camera lights and the crashing Pacific surf, something older and darker persists. It persists in the high Sierra Nevada, where the snow fell too early and did not stop. It persists in a vacant lot in a Los Angeles neighborhood, where a young woman's body was left like a message no one has ever been able to read. It persists in a city that once spent a year checking its mail in terror, waiting to see what a killer who called himself a god would send next. It persists in a maze of rooms built by a grieving widow who could not explain, even to herself, why she could not stop building. And it persists along the ridgelines of an ancient coastal mountain range, where something tall and featureless has been watching travelers from the edges of the world for longer than California has had a name. This is not a story about a haunted house. This is a story about a state that collected tragedies the way the desert collects bones, quietly, efficiently, and without apology. Story 1. The Mountain That Ate Them Alive. The Donner Party. It is November 1846, and the snow is falling so fast it has erased the pass entirely. Somewhere beneath 60 feet of packed white silence, there are 87 people who went to sleep in October thinking California was just over the next ridge. They were right. California was only a few miles away. They would never reach it in time. And before spring arrived, some of them would do something that no one who survived could ever fully explain. Not to their neighbors, not to their children, and not to themselves. In the spring of 1846, a wagon train left Springfield, Illinois, bound for California. It was a diverse group of nearly 90 men, women and children, farmers, tradespeople, young families looking for a second chance in the West. They called themselves the Donner Reed Party, after two of their leaders, 60-year-old farmer George Donner and his business partner, James Reed. The journey from Missouri to California typically took 4 to 6 months. Travel on the established Oregon Trail was difficult, but navigable. The Donner Party, however, would not take the established trail. At a trading outpost in Wyoming, they received a letter from a man named Lansford Hastings. Hastings was a land promoter who had published a guidebook advertising a new route to California, a supposed shortcut called the Hastings Cutoff. What Hastings did not tell them was that he had never actually traveled the route himself with wagons. He promised to guide them personally through the new path. By the time the Donner Party arrived at the agreed meeting point, Hastings had already left with a different, larger wagon train. The consequences of that choice would take the rest of the year to fully reveal themselves, and they would reveal themselves in the most terrible way imaginable. The Hastings Cutoff did not save time. It cost them weeks. The so-called shortcut drove the party across the brutal salt flats of the Great Salt Lake Desert, where temperatures swung between blistering heat and freezing nights, where the salt crust broke under wagon wheels and the oxen went mad with thirst. The journey across the desert alone took 6 days instead of the promised 2. They lost dozens of cattle and several wagons. By the time they rejoined the main trail in Nevada, they were exhausted, low on supplies, and critically, fatally late. They had to cross the Sierra Nevada before the November snowfall closed the mountain passes. They knew this. They pushed the animals hard. They lightened the wagons. They argued with each other and kept moving. In one violent dispute along the Humboldt River, James Reed stabbed and killed a man named John Snyder during an altercation over tangled wagons. Reed was expelled from the party and forced ahead alone, unarmed, while his wife and children remained with the group. By the end of October, they reached the foot of the Sierra Nevada. The pass was within reach. On the night of October 28th, the snow began to fall. By morning, it was 5 feet deep. By the following week, it was higher than the rooftops of the crude cabins they scrambled to build near Truckee Lake, high in the mountains. The pass above them was completely buried. California, warm, golden California, was just on the other side. They could not reach it. They could not go back. They were sealed inside the mountain. 87 people were now trapped in one of the most savage winter environments in North America. They had arrived with almost no food. The cattle they had managed to bring were dying, their carcasses frozen and stacked in the snow like provisions in a grim pantry. The lake trout were elusive, and the hunting was nearly impossible in the deep drifts. Their cabins were cramped, freezing, dark, dirt floors covered in animal hides, flat roofs leaking snowmelt, no windows, just crude holes cut for doors. Patrick Breen, a farmer from Iowa who had traveled with his wife and 7 children, began keeping a diary. His entries began as weather reports, then slowly transformed into something else. A quiet, escalating record of what happens to human beings when hope runs out by degrees. He noted the deaths as they accumulated, first the elderly, then the sick, then the young. As December deepened into January, the storms arrived back to back. The group's strongest members, 15 men and women, strapped on improvised snowshoes and attempted to cross the pass on foot to find help. They called themselves the Forlorn Hope. They carried 6 days of rations for a journey that would take more than a month. Somewhere in the Sierra snowfields, they ran out of food. The survivors of the Forlorn. Hope did what the human body eventually insists upon when the alternative is death. They ate the dead. The act of cannibalism, while horrifying, is in many ways the clearest documented fact of the Donner Party story. What historians have found more troubling, and what remains a subject of genuine archaeological and historical debate, is not simply that it happened, but the full scope of what happened. In 2003, forensic archaeologists excavating the site of the Donner encampment at Alder Creek found fragmented human bone among hearth remains, alongside the bones of animals, cattle, horses, all showing the same cutting and burning patterns. The excavation, published in peer-reviewed journals, confirmed the physical evidence of cannibalism at both the main camp and the Forlorn Hope's camps in the snow. But one figure continues to generate particular unease: Louis Kesselberg. The German immigrant was among the last survivors rescued from Truckee Lake in April 1847. When rescuers reached him, he was alone. Tamsin Donner, George Donner's wife, had voluntarily remained in the mountains to care for her dying husband. She had been alive when previous rescue parties had passed through. When the final rescue team arrived, Tamsin Donner was dead, and Kesselberg was found with, according to rescue party member Nicholas Clark, a bucket of human blood and the remains of Tamsin Donner herself. Kesselberg insisted Tamsin had died naturally and that he had simply been too weak to bury her. He was never charged with any crime. He lived the rest of his life in Sacramento, where he opened a restaurant. He was never acquitted of suspicion in the public mind. The formal record did not pursue him. Of the 87 members of the Donner Party, 39 died in the Sierra Nevada. 4 rescue parties went into the mountains between February and April 1847 to bring them out. The last known survivor rescued was Kesselberg himself. What makes the Donner Party story transcend its horror is a single, quietly devastating detail found in Patrick Breen's diary. On February 28, 1847, Breen recorded the following, noting what his neighbor Lavina Murphy had said, that she thought she would commence on Milt, meaning Milford Elliot, a young teamster who had just died, and eat him. Breen added, almost as an afterthought, that he did not think she had done so yet. Yet, that one word contains the entire psychological horror of the Sierras that winter. Not the act itself, but the moment when a person who would never under any other circumstances conceive of such a thing begins to calculate when, rather than if, the mountains had not just trapped their bodies. They had altered the interior landscape of who these people were allowed to be. The survivors were rescued in waves between February and April 1847. Many carried the trauma for the rest of their lives, though several, like Virginia Reed, who was 13 years old in the mountains, went on to live long and apparently stable lives. The pass, the lake, and the surrounding geography were all eventually named after the Donner Party, monuments embedded in the California landscape itself. Today, Donner Memorial State Park stands at the site of the camps. and the Donner Party Museum documents the journey in detail. The 2003 archaeological excavation at Alder Creek, led by Dr. Gwen Robbins-Shug and colleagues, produced peer-reviewed published findings confirming physical evidence of cannibalism at the campsite, resolving a debate that had lingered for a century and a half. Lansford Hastings, whose fraudulent guidebook and abandoned promise set the catastrophe in motion, continued his life in California. He was never held legally accountable. George Donner is buried somewhere in the Sierra Nevada at a location that has never been found. His wife, Tamsin, who survived to the last and refused rescue to stay with him, rests somewhere near Alder Creek. The mountains kept them. The mountains, in the end, kept them both. The pass that bears their name is driven through by millions of cars every year on Interstate 80, through the same peaks, above the same valley, past the same blue lake where the snow once fell and did not stop. Most people do not slow down. Story 2, The Black Dahlia, Los Angeles. 1947, on the morning of January 15, 1947, a mother named Betty Bersinger was walking her 3-year-old daughter through a vacant lot in the Limert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. The morning was clear and cold. She noticed what she first thought was a discarded department store mannequin, broken in half. Then she looked again. It was not a mannequin. She would be the first of many, many people to wish it was. Elizabeth Short was 22 years old. She had been born in Boston, Massachusetts, had spent portions of her childhood in Florida, and had arrived in Los Angeles in July 1946. She worked as a waitress and had rented a room behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub on Hollywood Boulevard. She was described by those who knew her as charming and warm. Though her life in Los Angeles had been unstable, she moved frequently, relied on acquaintances for housing, and had no known acting credits, despite later being described in the press as an aspiring actress. On January 9, 1947, a 25-year-old salesman named Robert Manley drove Elizabeth from San Diego back to Los Angeles and dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. She was seen by hotel staff using a lobby telephone. She was reportedly seen at a cocktail lounge a few blocks away shortly afterward. She was never seen alive again. 6 days later, Betty Bersinger's call to the police brought detectives to a vacant lot on South Norton Avenue. What they found there became the most photographed crime scene in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department. Elizabeth Short's body had been completely severed at the waist. The two halves were positioned approximately 1 foot apart, placed with a precision that suggested deliberate arrangement rather than disposal. Her skin was pallid and completely drained of blood. Her face had been slashed from the corners of her mouth to her ears, the cut now known as a Glasgow smile. There were ligature marks on her wrists, her ankles, and her neck. Portions of flesh had been removed from her thighs, and her body had been washed clean before being deposited in the lot. The autopsy, conducted by Los Angeles County Coroner Frederick Newbar on January 16, 1947, confirmed what the crime scene had already suggested. This had not been a crime of impulse or passion. The bisection of the body had been performed post-mortem using a surgical technique called a hemicorporectomy, a procedure taught in medical contexts. The cut itself had been made with precision between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. Her cause of death was cerebral hemorrhage from blows to the head and lacerations to her face. The body had been transported to the lot after death. There was no blood in the soil beneath her. She had been killed somewhere else, cleaned, and presented. The FBI identified Elizabeth Short's body within 56 minutes of receiving her fingerprints. She had been arrested for underage drinking in 1943, which meant her prints were on file. What followed was the largest manhunt in LAPD history up to that point. 750 investigators assigned to the case, including 400 sheriff's deputies and 250 California State Patrol officers. The city offered a $10,000 reward. 6 days after the body was discovered, the Los Angeles Examiner received a phone call from a man claiming to be the killer. He said he would eventually turn himself in. He told the editor to expect souvenirs of Beth Short in the mail. 3 days later, the Examiner received a manila envelope. It had been carefully assembled, words cut from newspaper clippings, addressed to the Los Angeles Examiner, and other Los Angeles papers. Inside, Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, photographs, business cards, and an address book embossed with the name Mark Hansen. Everything in the packet had been meticulously wiped with gasoline, destroying fingerprints, just as the body itself had apparently been cleaned. Over the following weeks, more letters arrived. Cut and paste threats, taunts, a note announcing the killer would turn himself in, followed by another note saying he had changed his mind. One letter offered a partial confession, then silence. The press, meanwhile, was engaged in something that defied the investigation at every step. The Examiner had obtained Short's mother, Phoebe, on the phone in Boston under false pretenses, telling her that her daughter had won a beauty contest, extracting all the personal information they could, then revealing the murder. The media circus that followed compromised evidence, contaminated witnesses, and generated over 60 false confessions in the first weeks alone. Over the entire life of the case, more than 500 people have confessed to killing Elizabeth Short. None of the confessions were credible. None produced an arrest. LAPD detectives investigated more than 150 suspects. The most prominent among those later identified by researchers include George Hodel, a Los Angeles physician, later accused posthumously by his own son, former LAPD homicide detective Steve Hodel. George Hodel had prior connections to Short through his social circle, had been investigated, but not charged, in the death of his secretary Ruth Spaulding, and was accused and acquitted of raping his own daughter. After George Hodel's death, Steve Hodel published a book arguing his father was the killer, citing circumstantial evidence, including a photograph he believed resembled Elizabeth Short, found among his father's belongings. The LAPD reviewed the claim. No charges were ever filed. Other prominent suspects have included a doctor named Walter Bailey, who lived 1 block from the lot where the body was found, a man named Jack Anderson Wilson, who died in a hotel fire in 1982 before investigators could fully pursue him, and numerous others who have been named and dismissed over 8 decades of investigation. What investigators have consistently agreed upon: the bisection of the body required medical knowledge. The killer had almost certainly kept Elizabeth Short alive in a private location for at least several days before her death, based on her time of death and the last known sighting. The killer had access to gasoline and used it methodically. The killer sent correspondence after the murder and stopped suddenly. The killer has never been identified. The LAPD has classified the Black Dahlia case as an open, unsolved homicide. On March 14, 1947, 2 months after the body was found, a suicide note was discovered, folded in a shoe left at the edge of the Pacific Ocean at Venice Beach. The clothes beside it included a coat, trousers, and a t-shirt. No body was ever found in the water. The note read, "To whom it may concern, I have waited for the police to capture me for the Black Dahlia killing, but have not. I am too much of a coward to turn myself in, so this is the best way out for me. I couldn't help myself for that, or this. Sorry, Mary." The clothes yielded no identity. No one stepped forward to claim them. Police could not determine if the note was genuine. It was filed as unverified. 7 decades after that morning in the vacant lot, it remains unverified. The Black Dahlia case became a cold case by the spring of 1947. In September 1949, a grand jury convened specifically to address the LAPD's failures in solving several murders of women and children, including Elizabeth Short's. Further investigation traced her movements in Texas, New England, and Florida. Nothing useful emerged. The case was never closed. It remains on the books as an open homicide in Los Angeles County to this day. The lot on South Norton Avenue, where Elizabeth Short was found, became a residential block. Nothing marks it. There is no historical sign, no memorial, nothing to indicate that the most famous unsolved murder in the history of Los Angeles happened on that specific patch of ordinary sidewalk. What makes the Black Dahlia case genuinely terrifying is not the act itself. It is the intelligence behind it. Whoever killed Elizabeth Short cleaned the body and cleaned the scene. They wiped the correspondence with gasoline. They arranged the body like punctuation. They called the newspaper to announce the souvenirs. They wrote letters that taunted the investigation for weeks. Then they stopped, and they were never found. The most meticulous crime in the history of Los Angeles was met with the most meticulous disappearance. Elizabeth Short waited at the Biltmore Hotel for someone she trusted. 78 years later, we still do not know who it was. Story 3. The Zodiac. He told them his name was in the code. The letter arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle on August 4, 1969. It began, "Dear editor, this is the Zodiac speaking." The man who wrote it had already killed 4 people. He enclosed coded messages that he claimed, when decrypted, would reveal his name. The first cipher was cracked within days. It contained no name. It said, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. When I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all the I have killed will become my slaves." He sent 37 more letters after that. He was never caught. Northern California in 1968 was a place transformed. The summer of love in San Francisco had just passed. The country was in the middle of a crisis of violence. Assassinations, protests, the war still playing on television every night. Into this fractured atmosphere stepped a killer who understood, better than almost any criminal before him, that the crime was only half the act. The audience was the other half. His confirmed attacks took place in the San Francisco Bay Area, from Benicia and Vallejo in the north to San Francisco proper, spanning December 1968 to October 1969. The confirmed victim count is 5 dead, 2 injured. The killer himself claimed 37. The first confirmed killing occurred on the night of December 20th, 1968. 2 high school students, David Faraday, 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, 16, were parked at a lover's lane on Lake Herman Road in Benicia when an unknown attacker pulled alongside their car. He fired at Faraday through the window, shot him in the head as he tried to escape, then chased Betty Lou Jensen across the gravel as she ran. He fired 6 shots at her retreating back. 5 connected. She fell less than 30 feet from the car. The attack, police estimated, took 2 to 3 minutes. There were no witnesses. There were no usable prints. There was no motive anyone could identify. 7 months later, on the night of July 4th, 1969, a young woman named Darlene Ferrin and her companion Michael Majot were shot in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, just 2 miles from Lake Herman Road. The attacker returned after initially driving away, parked beside their car, shone a flashlight inside, and opened fire without speaking a single word. Ferrin was killed. Majot survived, badly wounded, and described the attacker as a heavy-set white man with curly brown hair. At 12:40 in the morning, shortly after the shooting, a man called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone and calmly reported a double murder. He told them where to find the bodies. He told them the weapon used. Then he said, "I also killed those kids last year." The call lasted less than a minute. The payphone was traced. It was 2 blocks from police headquarters. No one was ever identified from it. The July 31st letters to 3 Bay Area newspapers changed everything. The writer enclosed a 3-part cipher, demanded the codes be published on front pages, and threatened mass killing if they were not. The newspapers published the ciphers. The first cipher was cracked within days by a couple from Salinas, not cryptographers, but a school teacher and his wife named Donald and Betty Harden, who correctly guessed the word kill would appear in the text. The decoded message revealed no name, only the killer's philosophy, that he was collecting slaves for the afterlife. That killing was more thrilling than any other sensation, and that he would not reveal his name because the police might slow his collection. What the Zodiac understood, and exploited with terrifying competence, was that the letters were themselves a weapon. Each one prolonged the terror. Each one added to the mythology. When he attacked Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa on September 27, 1969, he arrived wearing a black executioner's hood with a white crosshair symbol stitched to the bib, the same symbol he used to sign his letters. He tied them up, told them a fabricated story about escaping from prison, then stabbed them both repeatedly. He stabbed Cecilia Shepard 10 times. He stabbed Brian Hartnell 6 times. Before walking away, he found a black felt-tip pen and wrote his kill tally on Hartnell's car door. Hartnell survived. Shepard lapsed into a coma during transport and died 2 days later, without regaining consciousness. The Zodiac then drove 27 miles to a payphone in downtown Napa and called the sheriff's department to confess. When police traced the call, they found the phone still off the hook. On October 11, 1969, the Zodiac shot cab driver Paul Stein in the head in the Presidio Heights neighborhood of San Francisco. 3 teenagers witnessed the murder from a window across the street and called police while the Zodiac was still at the scene, wiping down the cab and cutting a swatch of fabric from Stein's shirt. A police dispatcher transmitted the description incorrectly. 2 officers who encountered a white man matching the description walking north on Washington Street minutes after the murder let him pass, accepting his explanation that he had seen a man running with a gun. The Zodiac later claimed he was that witness. Over the following years, he sent 30 confirmed letters. He sent coded messages, maps with a bomb diagram, greeting cards, and in one letter in 1974, a sardonic reference to the film The Exorcist. 2 of his 4 ciphers have been decoded, the Z408 in 1969 and the longer Z340 cipher in December 2020 by a team of international codebreakers. The Z340, cracked 51 years after it was sent, contained no name. It read in part, "I hope you are having lots of fun trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise." 2 ciphers remain unsolved. The only suspect ever formally named by law enforcement was Arthur Lee Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender. Allen was investigated multiple times across 2 decades. Physical evidence, however, did not conclusively link him to the crimes. A handwriting analysis found his writing did not match the Zodiac's letters. DNA evidence collected later was inconclusive. Allen died in 1992 of a heart attack without being charged. The San Francisco Police Department officially marked the case inactive in 2004, then reopened it before 2007. It remains open today in multiple jurisdictions, including the California Department of Justice and the FBI. In January 1974, the Zodiac sent his final confirmed letter to the San Francisco Chronicle. He had gone silent for 3 years. The letter referenced the film The Exorcist and suggested that a recent murder was connected to him. At the bottom, he added his running victim count, which he had been updating in correspondence since 1969. The count by then stood at 37. Law enforcement has confirmed 5 victims. The gap between 5 and 37 has never been bridged. The letter was signed with the crosshair symbol, as always. After January 1974, the Zodiac was never heard from again, at least not from any letter authorities consider confirmed. No arrest was ever made. No suspect was ever charged. The crosshair symbol has appeared in forensic discussion in dozens of cold cases across California and beyond. None have been definitively attributed to the Zodiac. He simply stopped. And in stopping, he gave investigators nothing to pursue. He chose his exit the same way he chose everything else, deliberately, without leaving a fingerprint. The Zodiac investigation fundamentally changed how California law enforcement handled serial crime communications. The case contributed directly to the development of interagency cooperation in homicide investigation. The SFPD worked the case through multiple generations of detectives. The 2 surviving victims, Michael Mageau and Brian Hartnell, gave testimony publicly for decades. Mageau, in 2009, identified a photograph of Arthur Lee Allen as resembling the man who shot him. The identification came decades after the fact and after Allen's death. It was not actionable. The Z340 cipher's decryption in December 2020 by David Oranchak, Sam Blake, and Jarl van Eyck was confirmed by the FBI. It did not reveal the killer's name. 5 families in Northern California lost someone to a man who never gave them a name. 57 years later, they still have not received one. The Zodiac wrote in his very first decoded message that he would not give his name because the police might stop his collection of slaves. He never gave his name. After more than 50 years of investigation, the most sophisticated forensic agencies in the world have not been able to take it from him. The crosshair symbol sits in evidence boxes in Napa, Vallejo, and San Francisco, waiting for a name to be attached to it. It is still waiting. Story 4, The House That Never Stopped. Winchester, Mystery House. San Jose for 36 consecutive years, from 1886 until the morning of September 5, 1922. Construction crews arrived every day at a Victorian mansion in San Jose, California, and went to work. They built stairways that ascended to blank ceilings. They installed doors that opened onto 10-foot drops above the garden below. They built windows into interior walls that looked out into other rooms. They worked for a woman named Sarah Winchester, who was worth tens of millions of dollars, who rarely left the property, who refused to be photographed, and who, so far as we know, never once produced a blueprint. When she died, the construction stopped, not because she had finished, because she had died. Sarah Lockwood Pardee was born in 1839 in New Haven, Connecticut, and was by most contemporary accounts a brilliantly intelligent woman. She spoke 6 languages, was educated at an exceptional level for the era, and in 1862 married William Wirt Winchester, heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, the manufacturer of the rifle that had become so ubiquitous in the American West that it was called the gun that won the West. Grief arrived early and compounded. In 1866, Sarah's infant daughter Annie died from a condition called marasmus, a severe form of malnutrition. She never fully recovered. In 1880, her husband William died of tuberculosis, leaving Sarah one of the wealthiest widows in the United States, with a 50% stake in the Winchester Repeating Arms Company that generated roughly $1,000 a day in income, an astonishing sum in the 1880s. Shortly after William's death, Sarah Winchester moved to California. In 1884, she purchased an unfinished 8-room farmhouse in the Santa Clara Valley, near San Jose, and she began to build. She kept building for the next 38 years. There is no single incident in Sarah Winchester's story. There is instead an accumulation, a structure that expanded so relentlessly and so strangely that it came to function like an incident in architectural form. What began as a small farmhouse eventually encompassed 24,000 square feet, 160 rooms, 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors, 47 stairways and fireplaces, 13 bathrooms, and 6 kitchens, spread across multiple floors that rose and fell at irregular intervals, connected by passages that looped back on themselves, and rooms sealed off from the rest of the house for reasons no one has ever determined. Some of the architectural details are simply unusual. Others cross into something that no structural or aesthetic explanation fully satisfies. There are staircases with steps only 2 inches high, 7 flights of them, sometimes leading directly into a ceiling. There are doors that open outward onto sheer drops. There are windows installed in floors. There is a chimney that rises through 4 floors and stops 1 inch below the ceiling in the attic, never connecting to the room below. There are rooms inside rooms, visible from one angle and inaccessible from the next. Sarah Winchester, it must be emphasized, was not an untrained eccentric. She employed skilled craftsmen and architects. The quality of construction, the inlaid wood, the Tiffany stained glass windows, the silver and gold fixtures, the parquet floors, is extraordinary. These were not accidents. They were choices. But whose choices, and toward what end, remains genuinely unanswered. The legend that attached itself to Sarah Winchester's house, the one most people know, is this: that she built continuously to appease the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles, guided by psychic instruction, racing against the deadline of her own death, which the spirits had told her would come the moment construction ceased. It is a compelling story. It is almost certainly not true. The first known printed version of it appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle on February 24, 1895, while Sarah was still alive and building. The newspaper declared that she believed building must never stop or she would face bad luck. The story then elaborated in the yellow journalism tradition of the era, adding details about psychics, spirits, and the bullet-killed dead. There is no documented evidence that Sarah Winchester ever consulted a psychic, attended a seance, or believed herself to be haunted. Her own letters and the recollections of those who knew her suggest something more human and more heartbreaking. A grieving woman, devastated by the loss of her daughter and husband, channeling her considerable intellect and nearly unlimited resources into a project that gave her purpose and control, in a world where grief had removed both. The rheumatoid arthritis that, progressively disfigured, her hands may also explain her increasing reclusiveness. She was not a woman who wanted to be seen. She wore heavy veils and rarely received visitors. And yet, what she built cannot be explained entirely by grief or arthritis or the aesthetics of the era. Some of what she built has no rational architectural purpose. The staircase that ascends into a solid ceiling serves no function. The door that opens onto a garden dropped 12 feet below is not an error. The historians who have studied the house most carefully acknowledge that certain features remain genuinely unexplained. The most carefully researched assessment of the Winchester Mystery House suggests a complex intersection of factors. Genuine architectural innovation. Sarah incorporated modern features like gas heating and push-button light fixtures decades before they were standard. Earthquake damage that reconfigured portions of the structure. The 1906 San Francisco earthquake collapsed several towers and sealed off rooms. Subsequent modifications made after her death by new owners and tour operators who may have enhanced the house's weirdness for commercial purposes. And at the foundation of it all, a grieving Victorian woman of extraordinary means who built without a plan because she was living without a plan. What remains genuinely mysterious is not whether Sarah Winchester was haunted by supernatural forces. It is the question of what, precisely, she was building toward. She never completed a room and moved to the next. She kept modifying, expanding, rerouting, sealing. Construction on the house did not advance in a normal architectural arc. It circled. Some historians propose she may have been designing a deliberate labyrinth, a private world that only she fully understood, a place where she could disappear into complexity. Others suggest the ongoing construction was simply the only activity that gave her life its forward motion after the deaths of her daughter and husband. She could not stop building because stopping meant acknowledging that there was nothing left to build toward. When Sarah Winchester died on September 5, 1922, she passed away in a bedroom of her house, surrounded by unfinished construction. Workmen found nails only half hammered into walls, lumber stacked for the next day. The house was mid-sentence when it stopped. After Sarah Winchester's death, workers tasked with cataloging the house spent weeks attempting to map it and gave up. The estate sold the property and its contents, and the house opened to the public as a tourist attraction on June 30, 1923, less than a year after Sarah's death, capitalizing on the very legend she had almost certainly never subscribed to in life. Among the items found in the house after her death were 13 coat hooks in certain rooms, 13 candles on certain chandeliers, 13 windows in certain walls, 13 steps in certain staircases. Whether Sarah chose the number 13 deliberately, whether it was coincidental, or whether later owners arranged the details for maximum mystique, is a question the house has never fully resolved. What is documented is this: the house was built by a woman in profound grief, with unlimited money, over 36 years, with no architectural plan and no stated purpose, and it is genuinely unlike any other structure built by any other human being before or since. The Winchester Mystery House has operated as a tourist destination since 1923 and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. Ghost tours run daily, offering accounts of phantom footsteps, cold spots, and the reported sensation of being watched in the sealed rooms. Multiple paranormal investigations have been conducted at the property. No scientifically verified evidence of supernatural activity has been produced. What investigators and staff consistently report, however, and what no skeptical explanation entirely dispels, is the quality of the disorientation that the house produces in visitors. People get genuinely lost inside it. People open doors that should lead somewhere and find a wall. They climb stairs and reach ceilings. The geometry does not behave the way geometry is supposed to behave. Whether that is Sarah Winchester's grief made physical, or simply the world's most extraordinary and purposeless architecture, depends entirely on what you believe about what grief can build. Sarah Winchester never explained what she was building. She never left a letter, a diary, a final statement, a blueprint. She died with the construction unfinished, the nails half driven, the lumber waiting. The house she left behind is the only record of whatever was happening inside her. Every sealed room, every staircase that runs out of ceiling, every door that opens onto nothing. All of it is Sarah Winchester speaking in a language that no one, in over 100 years of trying, has been able to translate. Story 5. The Dark Watchers. The Santa Lucia Mountains. John Steinbeck wrote about them in 1938 without explaining them, because in the mountains around Big Sur, they did not need to be explained. They were simply known. The Spanish settlers who arrived centuries before Steinbeck had a name for them: Los Vigilantes Oscuros, the Dark Watchers. They were tall, featureless, shadow dark, and they stood on the ridgelines at dusk and dawn. They watched the travelers below. They never approached, and if you turned to look at them directly, they were gone. No one has explained where they go. The Santa Lucia Mountains run roughly 105 miles along California's central coast, forming the dramatic spine of the Big Sur region that rises from the Pacific Ocean between Carmel and San Luis Obispo. These mountains are ancient, isolated, and geographically extreme. Deeply folded ridgelines, dense chaparral, fog that moves in from the ocean unpredictably, elevations that shift from sea level to nearly 6,000 feet within a few miles. The light in the late afternoon along these ridges behaves unusually. The fog creates optical conditions that exist almost nowhere else on Earth. For as long as anyone has been recording California's oral and written history, travelers, ranchers, and hikers in these mountains have reported the same phenomenon. Tall, dark humanoid figures standing on exposed ridges, usually at dusk or dawn, motionlessly observing those below. The figures are consistently described as featureless, no discernible face, no distinguishing features, but sometimes wearing wide-brimmed hats or carrying walking sticks. They are always seen at a distance. No one has ever reported a close encounter. There is no single incident with the Dark Watchers. There is instead a continuity of reported encounters stretching across centuries and cultures that is, in its own way, more unsettling than any single event. The phenomenon appears in the oral traditions associated with the region predating the arrival of European settlers. When Spanish missionaries and ranchers arrived and began moving through the Santa Lucia Range, they documented, without dramatic embellishment, the figures they saw on the ridgelines, naming them Los Vigilantes Oscuros. The name is purely descriptive, the Dark Watchers. These are not demons, not gods, not heroes. They are simply watchers. Their purpose is observation. In 1937, the poet Robinson Jeffers referenced them in his collection Such Counsels You Gave to Me, and other poems, writing of forms that look human to human eyes, but certainly are not human, coming from behind ridges to watch travelers. The following year, John Steinbeck gave them their most famous literary treatment in his short story, Flight, published in the Long Valley in 1938. Steinbeck's protagonist, a young man fleeing through the Santa Lucias, sees a dark figure on a white barren spur and quickly looks away, because it was one of the Dark Watchers. No one knew who the Watchers were, nor where they lived, but it was better to ignore them and never to show interest in them. Steinbeck wrote about them as though they were simply a known feature of the landscape, not a mystery to be solved, a condition to be navigated. What makes the Dark Watchers genuinely unusual as a piece of California folklore is the quality of their consistency. Most regional legends evolve dramatically over time, growing more elaborate, more violent, more specific. The Dark Watchers have not. Across several centuries and multiple cultural traditions, the reports describe the same figures, in the same mountains, behaving in the same way. They stand on ridges at twilight. They watch. They disappear when approached. In the mid-1960s, a newspaper archive from the Monterey Peninsula documented an account from a former high school principal who encountered a dark figure standing on a rock during a hiking trip in the Santa Lucias. When he called out to his companions, the figure vanished. He described it as large, featureless, and motionless, identical to accounts recorded a century earlier by Spanish settlers. Thomas Steinbeck, John Steinbeck's son, reported having encountered the Dark Watchers during his childhood in the Big Sur region. In 2014, he collaborated with artist Benjamin Brode on a book titled In Search of the Dark Watchers, which documented the history of the legend and included contemporary accounts from Big Sur residents. One longtime resident of the area, a man named Billy Post, who was considered an authority on Big Sur's local history, described the Watchers as a consistent presence in the mountains throughout his lifetime. The rational explanations for the Dark Watchers are scientifically credible and genuinely worth considering. The Brocken spectre is an optical phenomenon in which a person's own shadow is projected onto a low cloud, bank or fog layer by the angle of the setting or rising sun, creating the illusion of a vast dark humanoid figure at a distance. The Santa Lucia Mountains, with their proximity to Pacific fog and their extreme topographic relief, create conditions highly favorable to this optical effect. It has been documented in mountain ranges across the world, in the Scottish Highlands, the Alps, the Andes, and is consistently mistaken for an apparition by those who have not encountered it before. Infrasound, sound below the range of human hearing, generated naturally by wind moving through certain geological formations, is known to cause feelings of unease, disorientation, dread, and the psychological sensation of being watched. Some psychoacoustic researchers have proposed infrasound as a contributing factor in paranormal sightings in environments with specific topographic characteristics. The Santa Lucia Range, with its complex ridgeline geometry and consistent ocean winds, may generate infrasound under the right conditions. And yet, the specificity of the Dark Watchers across centuries, across cultures, across generations of unrelated witnesses is difficult to account for entirely with optical illusions and infrasound. People who had never heard of the Dark Watchers, approaching the Santa Lucias without prior knowledge of the legend, have returned describing the same encounter. A tall figure, dark, motionless, on a ridge at dusk, then gone. What cannot be explained is how the illusion produces the same consistent shape, humanoid, upright, often with what appears to be a hat or a staff, across witnesses who described the same thing in 1700, 1937, and 1965. The single most unsettling quality of the Dark Watchers legend is what it asks of you: not to run, not to fight, not to investigate, simply to look away. Every account of the Dark Watchers, from the Spanish settlers' documented tradition to Steinbeck's fictional treatment to the mid-century newspaper accounts, converges on the same instruction. If you see one, do not approach it. Do not try to look more closely. Do not show that you have noticed it. Stay on the trail. Mind your own business. This is not the behavior of a legend designed to frighten people away from a location. It is the behavioral instruction appropriate to something that watches, that does not want to be watched back, and that disappears when the rules are violated. Whether that constitutes a natural phenomenon that human psychology has anthropomorphized across centuries, or something that genuinely occupies the ridgelines of the Santa Lucia Range at the edges of the day, is a question the mountains have declined across all the centuries of asking. To answer, the Dark Watchers remain undocumented in any scientific or governmental record. No photograph or video has ever been verified as depicting one. The legend continues to be reported by hikers, ranchers, and travelers in the Santa Lucia Range to the present day. The Big Sur coastline is one of the most photographed landscapes in the United States. The ridgelines are heavily traversed by tourists, long-distance hikers on the Los Padres National Forest trail systems, and backcountry campers. The figure continues to be reported. Robinson Jeffers' home, Tor House, still stands on the Carmel coast at the northern edge of the Santa Lucia Range. It is open to visitors. From its tower on certain clear evenings, with the light at the right angle and the fog rolling in from the Pacific, the ridgelines of the mountains are clearly visible. No one can confirm what stands on them. The Dark Watchers do not threaten. They do not approach. They do not speak, leave marks, or take anything. They simply watch. Whatever they are, a trick of atmosphere, a centuries-old cultural persistence, a phenomenon that neither science nor folklore has fully categorized. They have been there on the ridgelines of California's central coast for longer than California has been California. They were watching before the Spanish arrived. They were watching when John Steinbeck passed through. They were watching this morning, at dusk, above the fog. They will be watching tonight. Stay on the trail. Don't look back. California does not remember its dark history the way older places do. There are no ancient ruins to walk through, no centuries-old churches heavy with grief. California's architecture is modern, its landscape is deliberately pleasant, its mythology is organized around arrival and reinvention rather than what is left behind. But what is left behind does not disappear, simply because a culture decides not to look at it. The snow that sealed 87 people into the Sierra Nevada in time. 1846 melted in the spring. The mountains stood there, unchanged, above a nation that turned the survivor's story into frontier legend and pressed west anyway. The lot on South Norton Avenue in Los Angeles, where a young woman's body was displayed like a message, was eventually developed into ordinary housing. The crosshair symbol that a man with no name drew in felt-tip pen on a car door in Napa Valley is still in an evidence box somewhere, waiting. The nails in the walls of Sarah Winchester's house are still half-driven. The ridgelines of the Santa Lucia Range are dark at dusk, as they have always been. These 5 stories are not the exception in California's history. They are closer to the rule, the underside of a state that has always asked its people to come, to dream, to push farther, to trust the promise just over the next pass, the next hill, the next golden horizon. Some of them found what they were looking for. Some of them left with less than they arrived with. Some of them did not leave at all. The mountains still hold the bones of people who trusted a guidebook that was wrong. The files on a young woman killed in 1947 are still marked open. The ciphers still contain 2 messages that no one has decoded. The house in San Jose is still mid-sentence. California remembers. It is simply very quiet about it. If these stories found you, and if the ridgelines look different to you now at dusk, you are not wrong to feel what you feel. California's history is not finished with anyone who pays it genuine attention. These are not ghost stories. These are the records of what happened in a place that called itself golden and kept certain truths buried in the mountains. The archives, the fog, and the geometry of a widow's unfinished rooms. Some truths in California do not want to be found. Some have simply not been found yet. The difference, after all this time, is difficult to determine.